Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Henrik. Thank you for tuning in wherever you're listening from. We are available worldwide through our website, redicecreations.com, and we have much more for you right there on all the topics that we find interesting and important, so I hope you check it out. Tom Horn is an internationally recognized lecturer, radio host, and best-selling author of several books, including Petrus, Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, and the upcoming Exo Vaticana. He is a well-known columnist who has been interviewed by U.S. congressmen and senators on his findings, as well as featured repeatedly in major media. Tom received the highest degree, honorary doctorate, bestowed in 2007 from legendary Professor Dr. I.D.E. Thomas for his research into ancient history. And today we're going to discuss the recent news of the abdication of Pope Benedict XVI and the prophecy of the final pope, Peter the Roman, whose reign would end in the destruction of Rome. The list of the popes from St. Malachi heralds the beginning of great apostasy, followed by great tribulation, setting the stage for the imminent unfolding of apocalyptic events. According to this prophecy, the next pope will be a false prophet who leads the world's religious communities into embracing a political leader known as Antichrist. We will also discuss the reformation of the Catholic Church and how whoever seats the throne of the papacy might take a more active part in both politics and the disclosure of extraterrestrial life, something Tom writes more about in the upcoming book, Exo Vaticana. All right, welcome back so soon, we should say, due to these very interesting developments, of course. Thank you for taking the time talking with us today, Tom.
Hey, Henrik, always great to be with you on Red Eyes Radio. Excellent.
I know how many requests you've gotten about this, understandably, so we're very fortunate to have you with us. We really appreciate it. So tell us, first of all, Tom, what has happened and what you know so far regarding the resignation of the Pope, Tom?
Well, of course, I think we knew, at least we speculated a lot, last year, 2005, when we released that book, Petrus, Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, because... and by the way, I should say that I don't consider myself to be a prophet. A lot of people now are saying that I am. I really don't see that at all. All I think I am is an investigator, and maybe I'm pretty good at analytical deductions, because we saw evidence in 2012 that the Pope was about to resign, and that, of course, he is the next to the final one on the ancient prophecy of the popes, which is ascribed to St. Malachi, which we can talk about if you like to. And I came on your show last year, and we talked about that and how it was our feeling that the Pope was going to resign in 2012. And in fact, I might have said this on your show, we certainly said it in the book, that we speculated he was going to resign in March or April of 2012.
Yeah.
Now, we were led to believe that that didn't happen, and here just on Monday, this last week, so we're only talking, 5 days ago or something, 6 days ago, 7 days ago, whatever it is. I'm sorry, I've been doing so much radio, I don't know what day it is anymore.
No worries, Tom.
but basically a week ago, the Pope announced that he was going to abdicate his bishopry over Rome and his sitting upon the throne of Peter. And now, why that brought a great deal of attention back upon me was 3 weeks before the Pope announced that he was going to resign, I was on another radio show with Steve Quayle, in which I said that the resignation of Pope Benedict was imminent. Well, then 3 weeks later he resigned, and everybody in the world wanted to know how I knew that, right?
Mm.
An interesting thing, though, that we have since learned is that, in fact, the Pope actually stepped down in 2012 exactly when we speculated that he was going to. And this was verified in a February 11 article in the New York Times. The title of that article, if somebody wants to look it up, is called "A Statement Rocks Rome, Then Sends Shockwaves Around the World." This was right on the heels of the Pope turning in his resignation. And if you read that article, you see where the editor of the Vatican-owned newspaper, the El Observatore Romano, a man by the name of Giovanni Maria Vian, he confirmed that the Pope had actually handed in his resignation at the exact time that we predicted he would, March 2012. And the New York Times quotes the Vatican spokesman saying, quote, "The Pope's decision was taken months ago after his trip to Mexico and Cuba in March 2012,
yes.
And it has been kept with a reserve that no one could violate." Well, boy, they really kept a lid on that, because even most of the cardinals were unaware that he had officially turned in his resignation. And maybe the bigger or deeper mystery is why he turned it in last year. And by the way, when somebody says, well, how did you deduce down to March or April of last year? That actually had a lot to do with the French Codex by René Thibault that I talked with you about a year ago. People could listen to that archive show in which we went through some of the speculation about René Thibault, and he's the one that actually had brought it right down to March and April. So based on a lot of other deductions, and then using the Jesuit codebreaker for Rome, who over 60 years ago said that that he didn't name Benedict, but he said that the Pope before Petrus Romanus would resign around March or April of 2012. So he absolutely nailed it on the head. Now this raises just a huge amount of questions about the prophecy of the popes, whether the prophecy of the popes was supernaturally inspired, either, divinely or demonically. I'll let other people determine what they think about that, right?
Yeah.
But it was supernaturally inspired, or maybe the deeper question is there are those inside the Vatican who hold this prophecy to some esteem, and the College of Cardinals have been using it like a roadmap to vote for, to elect popes who somehow can be seen as fulfilling that prophecy, and maybe there was some was there some pressure? Was there some opus dei manipulating going on behind the scenes in Rome that put pressure on Benedict to step down at that exact moment because that's the way the prophecy had speculated it? It just raises a huge number, probably more questions than answers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very interesting, very strange as well. Now I have to ask you, Tom, does all of this then have something to do with the trip to Mexico in March 2012? There came out some articles that he fell, he hit his head in some way, and this is like what has led to all of this. Do you agree with that? Have you read that?
Well, he was injured. Now, did he fall? Was he attacked? Just who in the world knows? But he was injured, according to the official stories. He woke up the next day, had blood on his head. By the way, today's news reporting that he's gone blind in one eye.
Really?
Yeah. And furthermore, we've known for some time that, and this played into our speculations about why and when he would retire, that his health wasn't doing that well. He was getting weaker and weaker. He's being wheeled around on a cart at some of the places where he went to speak. He himself, don't forget, in an interview had been asked whether it would ever be permissible for a pope to step down or should they always die in office. And he had actually argued, and he used to be known as God's Rottweiler. He was a strong theologian for the church, great at arguing. And he had actually said that if the Pope, got to a point where he could no longer carry out his duties as the Pope, then it would be permissible under church rules and law for that Pope to be able to step down so somebody else could do the job that could actually carry out the functions of the church. So he himself had argued that. That played into some of our deductions. And then his brother, who is a priest as well, last year had been talking about how his health was failing and that he felt he was putting pressure as a family member, a brother, on Benedict to consider stepping down. So a lot of this doesn't really come as a surprise. The fact that he was weak, that he's aged, he's 85, that he slipped and fell and maybe fractured his skull or something, it's all completely believable, but it still doesn't address how, over 60 years ago, René Thibault, how could he have known that you would have a pope who was going to get old and fall down and have to retire? The other thing, by the way, that's brought a lot of attention on us is that we say in our book, Petrus Romanus, that this pope would not die in office, but in fact he would retire. Now, that was a bold statement since this hasn't happened for 600 years. I mean, to put this in perspective, the U.S., Europeans had not even come here and discovered this as a country. This was a very long time ago since the last pope actually retired in office, but we predicted that he would. And 3 weeks before the pope stepped down, that's what I repeated, that he wouldn't die in office, that he was going to step down. And I had a very strong feeling about that. Now, of course, it brings us to the final part of that prophecy, and who is it that is going to be elected into the role of Petrus Romanus? And I don't know how long, when this show is going to play on air, but we're within, 2 to 3 weeks right now, probably. of that decision being made, unless for some reason it gets drawn out.
Yeah, this is going to go up in just a few days here. So basically, what we've heard so far is that he's officially going to resign on the 28th of February. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and so he's given a little bit of headway here and leeway, if you will. Do you know now if the procedure is going to be standard as usual when a pope, previously then has died? The whole all the cardinals are going to get together and select, and with the smoke and all the stuff that we know about. Is that what's going to happen next?
Yeah, that is what's going to happen next. And to understand the rules around this, right now, on the next day after his retirement is official. So if he goes through February 28th, and this is not a leap year, March 1, Peter the Roman Bertoni, who is his Carmelingo and the current Secretary of State, will then step into the official capacity of being the Pope in place of the Pope until a Pope can be elected. So if for no other reason than for at least a very short period of time, the prophecy is going to have a very uncanny sense about it, that you have an Italian, he's a Roman, he was born in Romana Canaverse, his name is Peter, so you have this a startling fulfillment of the prophecy, at least for a very short period of time, in Cardinal Peter Bertoni. Excuse me, got too many names going through my head. All of the elector cardinals, and there's not supposed to be more than 120. I don't know how flexible they are on those rules, but let's say 120 electors, the College of Cardinals. They will head now to the Vatican. And there'll be a whole process of sequestering the voting members so that the outside world can't have contact with them. Any cardinal who's turned 80 before the day that the papacy was vacated, either by death or resignation, cannot take part in the election. And that would mean that if Bertoni was elected, he's, I think, 78 now, that would just squeak in. I think there's reasons, by the way. I could give you who I think my top potential electees are. I think there's reasons why Bertoni at one time would have been a favorite and probably isn't now. I think Peter Turkson of Ghana had a lot going for him. He's made some mistakes in the last week because he's said to the media, he has said publicly that he would be willing to take the position of the Pope if the Lord willed it. Well, that's a giant no-no. The electors really frown on you being out there where it appears maybe that you're candidating like an American president. They don't like that at all. So he may have shot himself in the head with those comments. Anyway, there has to be a 2/3 vote plus 1 majority. That's what's required to elect a pope. 2 ballots each are held in the morning and afternoon. If a new pope's not elected after 12 to 13 days, then they can choose to impose just a majority rule, so a simple majority. And I could explain the whole process, how they write down the votes. People wonder what's up with the white smoke and the black smoke. That's because when they write down their votes, they fold the paper a certain way. They put that paper onto a certain plate that's then spilled over into another plate on the top of an altar. Those are counted by what they call the scrutineers. If though nobody gets the 2/3 plus 1 majority at the first part of the vote, they keep doing it. But in any case, if nobody's elected, there's a chemical that they put on those ballots, and they put them in the furnace, and when they're burned, then that smoke comes out, and it's black, and then they know that so far nobody's been elected. When the smoke finally turns white, then they'll know that somebody has been elected. So there's a whole process around how they do this. It's very archaic, but it's the way they still do it. And they're headed there now. Now, the rules normally would say that when a pope passes away, within 2 weeks, the College of Cardinals is supposed to come together to begin this whole process. That's the reason why everybody at first was saying they're going to come to Rome March 15th, because with the Pope resigning on the 28th, 2 weeks, basically those are the rules. But they can choose to come together sooner than that. And with the Pope resigning, they have they have an early notice. And that's why some media right now is saying they might come together even sooner than that and start the process earlier on in March. But right now we expect that from the middle to the end of March, certainly before Easter, they're hopeful that we will have a new pope, and the world will then know who Petrus Romanus, of this 900-plus-year-old medieval prophecy, who that personality is, and then, of course, wait with bated breath to see if the rest of the prophecies around him, the speculation around him, plays out.
Now, I want to get into more of the prophecy here, of course, and if you have any new top electees, as you said. I remember we talked about Peter Turkson the last time and Bertoni and all these as well, but before we go there, a few hours, I think, just after the Pope's resignation was announced, we had lightning striking the Vatican. I mean, come on. I'm not saying that this is not an act of God, but are they playing with harp here? This is like theatrics, Tom.
Well, one of the things people are going to learn, I think in the second hour we're talking about our new investigation, which we were already working on, called Exo Vaticana. We've been working on it ever since we stopped Petrus Romanus last year, and now we're feverishly trying to get that investigation finished. We're hoping to have actual book in print by the time the conclave is in session, and we'll see. I think the second book, it's actually bigger, it has more footnotes in it, and in many ways is actually more shocking than the first one. But as it heads to the typesetter, we don't know whether the last pope's going to turn out to be a person on our short list, but whoever he is, there's some intrigue surrounding how he might accommodate the newly celebrated astrotheology of Rome's top astronomers and theologians that we investigate in the second book. But part of this has to do with signs from the heavens. We devote entire sections in this book to pointing out how the Bible describes the false prophet. Some people believe that Petrus Romanus, some people believe that the very next prophet, pope, is going to be the false prophet of biblical fame. And I'm not just talking about evangelicals. There are Catholics who believe this, and there are Catholic academics who have written about it for a long time. So we go into all that. But here's the point. The false prophet and the Antichrist in the Bible have allegiances and endowments that are not of this earth, including the fact that both of them can call fire down from out of the heavens, which, of course, is suspected to be the host location of those aliens. What the first thing that went through my mind when lightning struck February 11th, now we're just talking, what is, again, 1 week ago. This is very recent.
Yeah.
Struck St. Peter's Basilica twice, immediately following the resignation of Pope Benedict. This whole thing, the very first verse that went through my mind had to do with how they have power to call fire down from out of the heaven. Now, it was also 2 lightning bolts, which numerically corresponds very well with the false prophet and the Antichrist.
How so?
Well, 2. They both have the power to call fire down from out of heaven. And so you have 2 lightning bolts, one after the other. And there's, by the way, there is an ancient occultic, but also a biblical perspective around this. For instance, the scripture says, and the Lord speaks once, yea, twice. And in occultism and in biblical scholarship, there is a precedent that says, if the Lord wants to confirm something, he'll repeat it. And so lightning striking twice, and not just lightning striking somewhere in Rome, hitting St. Peter's
Absolutely
Basilica.
Absolutely amazing.
Which and then right there, in the near distance is the Roman obelisk that speaks to the coming of this final figure that we believe to be the Antichrist. There's just a great deal around this. And again, this isn't just Tom Horn. They're Catholics right now. One of the most highly visited Catholic websites is run by Michael Brown. I don't know if you've ever interviewed him. He runs Spirit Daily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, not yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he and we've communicated over the past, but just something like 2-3 days ago, he had a headline that he wrote on Spirit Daily called "When Lightning Strikes, Sometimes It is Simple Energy in the Air, and Sometimes Perhaps Something Else." That's the title. And he goes on to point to Catholics and to remind them how many apparitions of their faith, and also omens, both auspices and inauspices, have been warnings to the faithful that have been accompanied by lightning. And he talks about the apparitions at Lourdes, which, by the way, were also commemorated last Monday, the day the Pope made his announcement. But he points to that and reminds Catholics how apparitions were combined with thunder and lightning at Lourdes. Then he points how it was a flash of lightning that introduced the first appearance of the apparitions at Fatima in 1917. And that's also something you and I talked about last year on your show, how that the true revelation of Fatima might have been being covered up, but might actually now come to pass with the election of the final Pope. Spirit Daily also points to Medjugorje, the night before Mary's first reported apparition. Lightning struck with such force that it actually damaged the village post office and some other buildings, and villagers went running out into the streets to sprinkle holy water on the ground. It scared them so much. Thunder and lightning on the mountains of La Salette in France that herald the appearance of Mary. So this list goes on and on and on. There is a significant number of comparable facts that when something of significance was happening within the Roman Catholic Church, whether it was church-approved apparitions or now the retirement of Pope Benedict, all of a sudden you get this lightning, right, coming from out of the heavens. It's very strange. Now, is it HAARP? You know, there is this this other thought kind of rambling in the back of my mind. I don't know if you remember, there was a woman by the name of Dr. Carol Rosen.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And she swore that before he died, Dr. Werner von Braun, in the 70s, she was working in an office with him, and he shared with her how that there was going to be a fake alien invasion of planet Earth, and that this was all what was really behind the whole Star Wars project and all that, that would be used to set up a one-world government, right?
Yeah.
Well, if that's true, that there's going to be some kind of a fake invasion that then would bring the world to its knees in fear, that would then give rise to a one-world government because everybody's, crying out for some kind of safe haven, then if that's true, if that technology is developed to that stage, well, then, of course, it could have been HAARP or something else that sent a lightning bolt down. But I take a more supernatural, metaphysical approach to it in my own belief system. And I think, like Michael at Spirit Daily, I think something is astir in the supernatural realm. And let me just give you a quote, by the way, from his website that I have right here. He's talking on and on and on about all this. He says, a pope's resigning for the first time in 6 centuries, a pope who took the name Benedict, as in the saint who battled evil. In a letter on the same day, February 11, 2013, naming a special envoy to a solemn celebration of the World Day of the Sick, Benedict included the term Mary, mediatrix of all graces. Now listen to what he says about this. This is a title that was used very sparingly by pontiffs. It's only attached in the minds of many Catholic faithful with the potential declaration of a new dogma, one that they feel could herald major events in the world, a dogma that up until now Benedict has long resisted. It comes when astronomers expect to see a highly visible comet, which may even appear during the conclave, announcing a new pope. Some believe the next pope will be the last in this particular era. Time will tell, end quote. So here you have a very popular Catholic website, and his writer is saying that this could be the last pope, the fulfillment of Petrus Romanus, and that this comet is a sign, and further, that a papal decree heralding a major change in dogma is coming. Well, I can tell you, though I can't yet let the cat out of the bag, our book, Exo Vaticana, is about that very subject, a coming papal decree that is going to, well, let me just put it this way. It's not only going to say that belief in extraterrestrials is okay for Catholics. What it's really going to say is that denying the reality of extraterrestrials is akin to heresy, because it limits God's creative ability. And what the Jesuits and members of Opus Dei have written in the form of official church theology, brand new doctrinal papers that have been written, which we're publishing, I think is absolutely, Henrik, it's going to shock the world, because they evidently know something that the rest of us don't know that seems to be pointing to a very imminent official disclosure moment that somehow, some way is going to need for the Vatican, the largest Christian organization in the world, to tell everybody that it's okay and these are our space brothers. And not only are they our space brothers, they're closer to God than we are, and they've come to show us the way.
Very interesting. I can't help to wonder as well how much of a political move all of this is. I mean, if we for a moment put the supernatural aspects to the side, which when we zoom out and look at the whole picture, we have to take everything into account, of course. But
sure.
This is at a time now when there's been tremendous scandals around the Vatican and all the stuff with the pedophilia and the protection of these priests and everything. And I couldn't help to feel at the beginning, at least, that someone might be forcing, Benedict off the stage, if you will, because they want to bring someone else onto the scene that can, do a better cleanup job, if you will, Tom, in all of this.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Again, that was all part of what we wrote in Petrus Romanus. In fact, we've had people this week and last week, since the Pope resigned, telling us that really the most tantalizing aspects of our investigation didn't have anything to do with the supernatural side of it. It was the side where we were dealing with the VATICANS and trying to interpret in a very just geopolitical atmosphere what that scandal, what was really going on behind the scenes. And we were trying to get some Vatican insiders, priests, trying to get them to talk to us, and we were having a very hard time, and mostly, I think, Henrik, because most of them didn't really know. You had to get way up the ladder. It was really among a small tribe of the real power brokers inside the Vatican, but the more we investigated it, at one time I did also hire a private investigator, and the more we investigated it, if you go back and look at articles that we published a year ago now, we were publishing these in March, April, and May on Raiders News Update, and you'll see how we were already talking about somebody leaking papal documents. That turned out to be Paola Gabriel, right? Yeah. He got arrested by the magistrates as the source behind the leaked documents. The minute that happened, we said he's just a figurehead. He's somebody who was being used, but he was being used by people much more powerful than he is. Then a Vatican computer expert was arrested, Claudio Sciarpaletti, and he was convicted of aiding and abetting, and we said he's just another pawn. And then one cardinal was suspected of operating behind the scenes. And anyway, what we've been saying from the beginning is that this was a much deeper internal power struggle. Well, now, church historian Alberto Maloni, he's writing how that all of it was just a power struggle among cardinals in the Curia, the Vatican Central Administration, a stratagem of tension, an orgy of vendettas. That's the kind of language they're using, preemptive vendettas. And then there was an article talking about how Bertoni was plotting. What was the language they used? Something like extraordinary counter moves. So it was counter move. But really it comes down to two or three very powerful people in the Vatican who were jockeying to take the place of Benedict. Whether they would look at that as, I want to play the role of Petrus Romanus, whether that part of it is true or not, didn't make any difference. They knew that Benedict's time, that his days were numbered, right? And they were jockeying for position, which included mudslinging against their main competitors. So you had people probably on the one side, Sedano, people like that, who were also part of the Fatima cover-up, who were using their political influence to try to, play off of some of these leaked documents to make Bertoni look bad. Bertoni, on the other hand, he's an Italian, probably has a lot of friends inside the Vatican that were trying to protect his position as possibly, the candidate that would take Benedict's place. But right now, some Vatican insiders are becoming more blunt. There have been news reports just in the last couple of days talking about since Benedict has stepped down, well, now some of these people are becoming a little braver about this mutiny of the Monsignors that's been playing out behind the scenes, jockeying for the role of the final pope. And the bottom line is the unpleasant reality is that a conflict has been going on for probably 24 months, at least for 18 months, over who will become Petrus Romanus. And it's been boiling beneath the surface, almost completely unknown to the public at large, but foresaw, I think, by some of the Catholic prophets, and not just Malachi or Morger, more recent Catholic prophets like Father Herman Bernard Kramer, who wrote about all this in the Book of Destiny and talked about the final pope who would come and how it would be a time that would be accompanied by a lot of great negativity around Rome. And by the way, even some of some of the most oldest Catholic prophets, Father Cardinal Manning, different ones, foresaw that Rome would eventually become so apostate that it would literally be destroyed. So are we seeing that? Is that what we're seeing? That beneath the surface we're seeing the beginning of the end? Or is it all just politics around the pedophilia scandal? The Pope now, here's another thing we learned was that when he resigned last year in March, April, secretly to just a handful of individuals, they started right at that moment taking, I think, what was an old nun convent or something, but a building was used by the nuns, but it's on the grounds of the Vatican, and they started remodeling that into an apartment, a building where Pope Benedict is going to retire. They started doing that March, April of last year, and were they at that time saying, in order to try to keep him from being prosecuted in an international court, which could then, as the Pope, represent Vatican, the Vatican at large, the Roman Catholic Church at large, which has just amazing levels of financial resources, to stop that, he could retire. We'll force him to retire, and we're going to give him a little place to live on the Vatican grounds, which we can say we're our own nation state, and nobody can come here and arrest him.
Right.
So, yeah. Is that what you was talking about?
Yeah, well, definitely. That's very interesting. And you mentioned financial resources, because I want to try to get a little closer to this on a geopolitical level. We're all wondering how much influence does the Vatican really have? How much does the Pope individually even have? Because if we look at least the language of the Vatican, as you said before, they are definitely kind of spearheading in some cases, the strive towards a new world order, a global government in some cases. And how important is it, do you think, for some of these people behind the scenes to become Pope? Would that even be significant? Would that be, can they influence a lot being that?
Yeah, I mean, look, they don't politic like American presidents do, or governors or whoever, who go out and step up on a stump and try to convince a bunch of voters of a particular thing. But they do politic. They sit in their lunch rooms and have wine and cigarettes and sit there and yak about who they think the next pope should be. And sadly, it probably doesn't have a whole lot to do with the spiritual health of the church. It usually has more to do with who could politically favor the ideas of those particular cardinals. That's really what it comes down to. Who could we put into office who could be a champion for our causes? And so that's another reason right now when you think about what's being said about Peter Turkson of Ghana. Oh yeah, his name would be an amazing fulfillment since he is named Peter, and once he started ruling from Rome, he'd be Peter the Roman, Peter from Rome. But how much political influence does Ghana have? I don't know, because I don't think there's a whole lot of Africans cardinals among the electors, but there is a majority Italian electors. And Rome is still an old boys club among the Italians. It just is.
Sure.
They went out on a limb, recently. They elected a German. They've elected other people, but I think this time around it's going to come back to Rome. My prediction would be that it's probably going to be an Italian. Now, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, he's the man most responsible for appointing a large block of Italian elector cardinals last year that Benedict endorsed, but he's also angered and embarrassed a lot of non-Italian cardinals, so I think it's going to be hard to get him elected. A little side note, by the way, Cardinal Bertone is a Salesian, which means a disciple of Don Bosco, the saint of the 1800s, who's famous for his vision about a future pope who arrives just as the Catholic Church goes through a fierce socio-political and spiritual storm that some have interpreted as the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Just an interesting side note there about Bertone, besides his name. Of course, Cardinal Peter Turkson. I think Cardinal Angelo Scola, he's also an Italian. He's got a strong Italian bloc of voters, and he works easily with them. I'm not sure to any extent that he's been involved in the conspiratorial aspects of mudslinging. He's got a theological background that issues from the church in Rome, so that they think should be addressed. So I think he's a possibility to keep in mind. There's another possibility that has the name of Peter, Cardinal Peter Erdo, and nobody's talking about him. He's a Hungarian cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church. He is the Archbishop in Budapest. He's the primate of Hungary. He's the president of the Council of the Bishops' Conferences of Europe, and he's only 61 years old. And if the cardinals this time around are looking for somebody who can stay in office for a while, he could be a surprise, Peter the Roman. Another possibility is Cardinal Bakara Batros al-Rahi. He's 72 years of age, so he's young too, but Batros means Peter in Arabic. So there's some other possibilities there that could be a surprising win that people right now are not talking about. But we're just going to have to wait and see. We did publish a top 10 list. I think the Canadian Coulee, I think he's a possibility. So anyway, I think I lost what the question was.
Oh, sure. No worries, Tom. Very interesting. What is this? Let's get a little deeper into what you think that this means then, potentially. I mean, let's say anybody comes onto the scene here which has the name Peter, let's say, becomes Peter Romanus, the last pope. In your view, what do you think that we're in for? What does this have in stock for us if one, even the prophecy is true, or the of the last pope? And does that mean like an era of the Antichrist ruling this planet, or what do we have to look forward to here?
Well, what both evangelicals and what some Catholic prophets have said for a long time is that when the final pope on the list of the prophecy of the popes, and don't forget that the prophecy of the popes itself says that this pope will serve the church during Great Tribulation, and then the city of Seven Hills will be destroyed.
Yeah.
So it's talking about destruction. Well, this is a biblical theme that the city on Seven Hills is the harlot, false religious enterprise, that Babylon mystery religion that will be destroyed. The Zohar, I don't know if I ever talked with you about that.
Oh, we have. I remember it. But relay it again for those who don't know.
Well, and what's also interesting about the Zohar is that it was written 700 years ago. It was written a couple of hundred years after the prophecy of the popes. There's no historical connection anywhere whatsoever that any of the writers of the Zohar were even familiar with the prophecy of the popes, because don't forget, the prophecy of the popes was hidden inside the Vatican for about 400 years. So it wasn't even public knowledge. But we have no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the Jewish writers of the Kabbalah would have been familiar with it. Now that makes this extraordinary because they also named the time frame 2012 to 2013. They named it. They wrote it down that this is when this was all going to happen, and that Rome would be destroyed. And their language is almost identical to what is contained in the prophecy of the Pope. So now, for people listening that don't know what I mean, there is contemporaneous to the arrival of the false prophet, if that's who Petrus Romanus is. And I'm not saying that the next pope will be the Antichrist or the false prophet.
Sure,
I'm saying that a lot of people believe that he will be, and they make that connection. And I'm saying he possibly could be, but I'm not saying he is. Got it? So in any case, but contemporaneous to the arrival of the false prophets and the Antichrist, there's this prophecy that's in the Jewish Kabbalah, the Zohar. That's the most important collection of Jewish mysticism. Was written in medieval Aramaic 700 years ago. But in that book, it has commentary on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. But in addition to that, it has a section called the Ve'era section, and this includes a subsection called the Signs Heralding Mashiach, or the Coming of the Messiah. And what's fascinating about this is that they set the date for his appearance in the Zohar in 5773. And in the Jewish calendar, which is different than our Gregorian calendar, right? We say 2012, we mean January to December 2012. Their time frame is different. The Jewish calendar begins in the new moon of September in our calendar, 2012, but ends a year later in August of 2013. And here's what they said, 5773. So what is that? That's 5 months ago now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, about 5 months ago now. They set the appearance. Now here's what they say. And let me preface this by also saying that to Christians, they would actually be talking about the coming of the Antichrist, because the Orthodox Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah. So they were still predicting his coming, but evangelicals and Catholics from the Bible would say they rejected Jesus, but the Bible says that another will come in his name, that there will be an Antichrist, a false Messiah who will appear, and for a period of time, who some dispensationalists talk about a 7-year period of great tribulation. For a period of time, the world is going to accept him as the Messiah. Now, okay, so let me read you what it says. Keep in mind, as I'm reading this, the prophecy in the Zohar, given by Jews hundreds of years, separate from the divination of the last pope. So you have the prophecy of the last popes talking about who potentially could be the false prophet, where the prophecy in the Zohar talking about coming of the Antichrist. But both of them talk about the reign of that period of time ending in the destruction of Rome. Here's what the prophecy of the Pope says: the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible and fearsome judge will judge his people. But when you look in the Zohar, here's what it says. In the year 5773, the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome. Now let me stop here for just a second and insert this. The only time that we know that all of the representatives of the nations of the world, the kings of the earth, the only time they would send representatives to Rome from all over the world would be during a conclave.
Yeah, exactly.
I know of no other time where all of the most powerful nations on earth would be sending their ambassadors or representatives to the Vatican than during a conclave. So let me go back to the prophecy. The kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome, and the Holy One will shower on them fire and hail and meteoric stones until they are destroyed, with the exception of those who will not yet have arrived there, end quote. So first of all, a 700-year-old Jewish prophecy in the Zohar telling us that about the time the Messiah is going to appear, the nations of the world are going to gather in Rome, and the only ones of those representatives that aren't going to be destroyed when the city is destroyed are those who were en route to get there and hadn't yet arrived. So this sounds like it's right at the very beginning of a conclave. People are assembling, they haven't got there. Now, then it goes on to say, these will commence, not all the kings will be destroyed. These will commence anew to make war. But from that time, the Messiah will begin to declare himself, and around him there will be gathered many nations and many hosts from the uttermost parts of the earth, end quote. So they're gathering in Rome. Something happens. Meteoric stones, fiery objects, as it's translated, fall from the heavens to destroy the city. This leads to war. The nations that are surviving or they're reacting to something, this is what's caused some Catholic mystics to speculate that this is going to be a terrorist attack on the Vatican during conclave, because you got these fiery objects falling that then causes a response from powerful nations throughout the world, including probably the United States, responding to that terrorist attack upon Rome. But this is going to be the catalyst, according to this Jewish prophecy, that gives birth to the appearance of the Messiah, who we would call the Antichrist. So what's amazing is when you take this 900-year-old Catholic prophecy, this 700-year-old Jewish prophecy, and just combine it with evangelical and Christian eschatology, it's an amazing glove fit around some terrible event that then causes World War III, but which then also causes the formation of the most powerful nations of the world coming together under global government, which then could present this personality, the Antichrist and the false prophet, the leader of the religious communities of the world, to give their devotion to the appearance.
Look at that. It's like, again, we said it before, and you have too, Tom. It's either it's a playbook or it's real, true, accurate prophecy. You know, it's very interesting. And again, just think about this. Tie in the comet here now that hit Russia 3 days ago. There's an asteroid DA14. You have IZON coming up in a few days. What if this is really is the precursor to something larger, comet-wise, asteroid-wise, actually coming in, the initial debris or something like that? It would be total mayhem, Tom, on this planet.
Yeah. Back to part of the supernatural part of this, when we were investigating the prophecy of the popes, we learned that there was also a long line of other Roman Catholics who, down through time, saw Rome being destroyed after becoming an engine of the Antichrist. But one thing that we turned up just recently that kind of ties a lot of this together, trying to track down, where some of the modern writers in some of the material we're working on for the new book, Exo Vaticana, where they came up with this idea that Rome would be destroyed and it's going to be the great harlot, and that somehow this is also connected to either a pretensive or actual announcement by the powers of the world that we are in contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. And what in the world does that have to do with the coming of Petrus, Romanus, and the Vatican and all that? Well, we're trying to put all this together. And there was a team of like 6 of us. Me and Chris Putnam are writing the book, but I have a team of like 6 of us trying to track these people down. We actually got interviews, by the way, with leading astronomers, including Guy Consolmagno. We got 5 interviews with him from Rome. So we got this right from the horse's mouth. And when we were trying to track down where some of this theology was coming from, we came across an associate of Popes John Paul II and also Benedict, Pope Benedict XVI. This was a friend of his. And he was considered one of the most important Catholic theologians, Hans Urs von Balthasar. Now, he died in 1988. And at his funeral, Cardinal Ratzinger then, who became Pope Benedict, of course, he praised his theology as correct and a proper roadmap for today's church. Well, what theology was he talking about? It was a provocative work by Hans von Balthasar called Casta Maritix, or Chaste Harlot. And in this work, he not only identified the Roman Catholic Church as the great harlot of Revelation, but he embraced it. And if you read Chaste Harlot, it's astonishing. Let me just give you a fast quote.
Sure, thanks.
Here's what it says. The figure of the prostitute is so appropriate for the church that it defines the church of the new covenant in her most splendid mystery of salvation. The fact that the synagogue left the Holy Land to go and be among the pagans was an infidelity of Jerusalem. The fact that she opened her legs in every road in the world. But this same movement, which brings her to all the people, is the mission of the church. She must unite and merge herself with every people, and this new apostolic form of union cannot be avoided, end quote. So he literally speaks in very brazen terms about how it is the responsibility of the church to spread its legs to every nation of the world. Astonishing. But so, I mean, okay, so he's one of the most outlandish, but we found that from this, the tentacles of this kind of thinking goes into a great deal of current theology, and there's no way on this show that I can get into what all this means. I should have the first typeset today, tomorrow, anytime now, and if you'll send me your email, I'll send it to you so you can read this first typeset book. It's not going to be in print for probably a month. You are going to be astonished at what some of these theologians are now saying and the way that all of this theology is married to the fulfillment of the prophecy of the popes, but also the coming of a new Catholic edict. The Pope can make a papal declaration. He can announce a new dogma. that then becomes something that the followers have to speak. He can speak, what do they call it, vicarious filii Dei. He can speak as the voice of God for the church, and he's infallible when he speaks in that role. And such is coming soon, and I think it's going to just absolutely astonish people what this all means. But we've documented it. We've got documents. We've got the comments from the actual theologians that are working on this for the Vatican, and we've got some of their own papers, which I don't think they're yet ready for the world to know about, but they're going to know about it.
Wow, really interesting. We're going to take a short break here, Tom. We're going to return and talk more in the second segment. Of course, we want to give out websites, RaidersNewsUpdate.com. You can catch a lot of the stuff that Tom has been talking about so far there. But, of course, the book, Petrus Romanus, it's out. It's available right now. We're going to link that up. But tell us just briefly a little bit about Exo Vaticana. When do you expect it to have it out again, Tom?
Well, we're rushing now. If you go to, like, Amazon, it and Petrus Romanus are both in the hot new releases, top releases there, and it's advertised there as being available in April the 15th, but we're trying to get it out a month ahead of time. We're trying very hard to get this done so that people will.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're talking with Tom Horn. It's a very interesting discussion about the abdication, of course, of the Pope. We're also talking about Petrus Romanus, the prophecy of the final Pope, and the larger picture, basically, of what all of this means, tying it into the new book, Exo Vaticana, Tom Horn. It's very interesting. I want to ask you, Tom, if you heard, this is back in 2011 now, but I couldn't help to notice of it because I actually just heard about it a few days ago. On January 28th, there was a UFO sighting over the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount. It was filmed and everything. Very difficult to determine if it was the real deal or whatnot. But what was interesting to me was that just a few days after this sighting, after this was videotaped, apparently a few-week-old baby was found, actually abandoned in the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. Did you hear about this?
I heard about it. I honestly don't know very much about it. But frankly, the connection between UFOs and that kind of activity with the Vatican is quite astonishing. In fact, I would encourage you, if you get a chance, to interview my author, Chris Putnam, who spends a great deal of time in this new book documenting the connection between Rome and UFOs. And when there are changes of pontiffs, there also seems to be the appearance of these UFOs, and he raises some very astonishing questions around it. In fact, the cover of our book, which shows these UFOs coming in and shooting a beam down on the top of St. Peter's Basilica, which is interesting in light of the lightning that struck.
That's right, yeah.
But there actually is a reason around why that cover was designed the way it was based on some of the research that he's done. So this would not surprise me. I did hear about the story, but I don't know anything about it.
It's just like we're in times right now of it's like a movie, you know. It's like that has that Antichrist kind of feel to it. And again, whether this is theatrics or where it's the real deal, I don't know, and I can't be able to determine that at this point. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter. The world is swept away in all of this, and decisions are made consequently. And I just want to know a little bit more about the alien connection that you were talking about, Tom, and what you think will happen in terms of how this will unfold. I mean, are we talking about something like, was it Arthur C. Clarke's novel, the End of Childhood, whatever it was called? I mean, is that the future scenario that we're looking at, where Rome gets in bed with some, aliens with superpowers, at least from our perspective, and starting to rule the earth from that perspective? What do you think we're in for here, Tom?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because that came up on a show I did with Steve Quayle on Hagman and Hagman just a few nights ago, and I doubt that you listened to that show, but that very book, Childhood's End, came up, and of course it's a discussion about these leathery winged, little horn, barbed tailed overlords.
Yeah.
And what it turns out to be, even the way he wrote the book, if you read it, the way he wrote the book, he's telling us that these are the demons. This is Satan and his demons from history, but we had it all wrong. They're not the bad guys; they're the good guys, and They're going to help us set up a utopia here on Earth. But let me tell you why. Here's what happened. We did a show with you last year, and we did one with Steve Quayle and some other ones, all at the same time, all within probably a 1-week period. And in those shows, we were talking about the prophecy of the popes. And I don't know how well your show did, but I know the ones we did with Steve shot it to the #1 blog talk show in the world for 1 week. But then, a week or two later, we came back, and we did a show on the Vatican ET connection. And that shot those shows to the #1 shows in the world for something like 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months. And it showed us that the world has a very strong interest in the Vatican extraterrestrial connection and some of the stuff that some of, like Father Jose Funes and others, had been saying in the public, what they'd been saying to media, seemed to be indicating that there was something deeper going on in Rome involving their theology, but maybe even more than their openness now to science. Maybe they knew something, right, that the rest of the world didn't know.
Yep.
And so what Chris Putnam and I decided to do was to start a second investigation that's connected to Petrus Romanus, but it really picks up this question of the Vatican extraterrestrial connection, and what role would Petrus Romanus, as the final pope, what role might he play in either preparing the world for or accommodating an official disclosure moment? Because if you wake up tomorrow morning and gigantic mile-wide ships are hovering over Washington, D.C. and the Vatican and all the rest of it, the first thing on the religious world's mind is going to be, what does this mean? Yeah. Is this God? Are these our creators? Are these demons? Is this deception? I mean, it's going to literally paralyze the world. And it makes sense that the Vatican, as representing the largest percentage of professing Christians in the world, and not just that, they're different than other churches. They have their own ambassadors to whatever it is, 100 different countries. I mean, let's face it, no other religious organization, Christian organization on the earth has the political power or ramifications and associations that the Vatican does. So it just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
That they're going to be the ones who are going to walk out into the well of the United Nations with the President of the United States and Russia and all the rest of them when they make the announcement, ladies and gentlemen, we have an announcement to make, we are in contact. Or we have an announcement to make, those ships hovering over your head, X, Y, Z. What is it they're going to say? So here's what we did. After we got together, we assembled our team, and we said, how could we deal with this in a way that it's never been dealt with before? Not just another book, right? On UFOs and whatever. I mean, how could we really deal with this? How can we really get to the bottom line between what the Vatican's astronomers and theologians are over the last 4 to 5 years, especially, the stuff that they're saying, the public comments that they're making about this being our space brothers, and they might be morally superior, closer to God than we are, children of God. How can we get behind that? What is it that they're really thinking? So here's what happened. We decided to start our investigation by going to the Vatican's Astronomical Technology Telescope. Now, we had to do this through the University of Arizona. We had to get permission. The University of Arizona oversees what happens there. But we were going there not with just astrobiology questions. We were going there with theology questions concerning high-level Vatican astronomers and the stuff that had been leaking to the media. Comments like, and I'll use Jesuit priest Guy Cosmonalgo because he's the one who also afterward gave us 5 different interviews from Rome. He's a leading astronomer. He turns up in media as a spokesman for the Vatican. He's worked at NASA. He's taught at Harvard. He's taught at MIT. He currently splits his time between the Vatican Observatory and Laboratory, the Specola Vaticana, which is headquartered at the summer residence of the Pope in Castel Gandolfo, Italy. He splits his time between there, and you'll see him in media. In fact, when the Pope resigned, the media kept running this picture of the Pope handing Cosmonalgo some papers, and I don't know what that was about, but that was the image they were using in the background of the story. He's the guy that oversees the Vatican's collection of asteroids and all that there in Italy, but he splits his time between there and Mount Graham in Arizona. And over the last few years, he, among some of the others, has been focusing a lot of time in attempting to reconcile science and religion in public forums, the media and whatever, specifically as it relates to the subject of extraterrestrial life and its potential impact on the future of faith as we have known it. And so we decided to contact him following, and if you want me to talk about the trip to Mount Graham, I can do that.
Tom, you're talking about the Lucifer Observatory, right? Isn't that where you went then?
Well, some people are calling it the Lucifer Observatory. So let's be clear. Okay. On Mount Graham is the Mount Graham International Observatory. That consists of 3 telescopes. There is the Large Binocular Telescope, which right now is still the largest of its kind in the world, though there's a new one being built that'll be even bigger, I think, in Europe. Right now it's the biggest one of its kind. It's an optical telescope. Between it and the Vatican's astronomical telescope is another telescope, a submillimeter telescope, a radio telescope, that observes the heavens in the submillimeter wavelength range. And then to the opposite side of that is the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope, or VAT. Now, the Lucifer device is inside the Large Binocular Telescope. It's not inside the Vatican telescope. It's inside the Large Binocular Telescope. But the whole mountain, all 3 telescopes, fall under the canopy of the Mount Graham International Observatory, and any of these astronomers can use each other's devices, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the Lucifer device is inside the Large Binocular Telescope. It's mounted between the focal points of the LBT's 2 giant. I'm not sure. I think, the film trailer that we have out there right now advertising the upcoming book, it shows pictures of me and Chris Putnam in our tour that we took there with the Jesuit and the technical advisor who works for the LBT, who spent most of the day with me and Chris. It shows pictures of us standing above the Lucifer device, him pointing it out. But we were there all day. They spent hours. We had access to everything. In fact, we were amazed at how much access they were willing to give us.
That's
and
nice.
they explained the Lucifer instrument. This observes in the near-infrared wavelength range.
Yeah.
And the importance of infrared is that it can detect objects that are too far away or faint to be observed in visible light, like distant planets, nebula, brown dwarf stars. It has longer wavelengths than visible light. That means it can pass through astronomical gas and dust without being scattered, and so on. So objects and areas that are obscured from view in the visible spectrum can be observed by Lucifer, the infrared technology. And for example, UFO researchers, they've fascinated for some time how infrared can be used to spot and track unidentified flying objects in the heavens that otherwise don't even turn up.
That's right.
On these other telescopes. In fact, some of the most astonishing UFOs ever caught on film. And you can watch some of these on YouTube if you just go over there and just type in infrared UFO. You'll see some stuff there that, the NASA, before they shut down their infrared telescope, I can't remember what they call it, but anyway, they were shooting film. That's where the giant miles-wide pulsating UFOs were being filmed, and some guy that had a small television show, maybe in Portland, Oregon, or Canada or something, was throwing those up online, so NASA shut it down because they didn't want people to see. Really, they didn't want people to see these enormous pulsating UFOs. They look actually like the old Europa discs that the ancients made, including the little notch that's cut out on one side of the Europa disc, look identical to these ships that are filmed in infrared.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, on the connection between the Vatican's astronomical telescope and the Lucifer device, there's a curious description, first of all, on the Vatican Observatory website concerning the Lucifer device. Actually, under the heading, and the heading's kind of long, but here's what it says: NASA and the Vatican's infrared telescope called Lucifer, a German-built, NASA and the Vatican-owned and funded infrared telescope for looking at Nibiru Nemesis, end quote. Now, why the Vatican Observatory website has allowed that caption to remain on their website is curious because, as you know, Nibiru and Nemesis, these are planets that return in orbit Are they watching them approaching the Earth? I mean, who knows why they've left that up?
There have been rumors about this for years, Tom, but what you're saying is that this is actually a caption now that still is on their website to describe what it's capable of doing, the telescope.
That's actually the caption that is on the Vatican's observatory website.
Wow.
So that's astonishing. We provide a picture of that because we figure they're going to take it down now that we're talking about it publicly. So we screen captured their website. We put a picture of it in our book. But of course, these that's been connected with Planet X.
Sure. Yeah.
More darkly than that, it's been connected with the destruction of planets that some people believe occurred when there was a great war between God and Lucifer in the remote past, when this powerful angel was cast out of heaven. And in fact, in the book of Job, where the prophet details how God destroyed the literal dwelling places of the angels that made insurrection against him, it specifically mentions the destruction of Rahab, which is a planetary body that was also known in ancient times as Pride, from which God drove the fugitive snake. So the question is, and this was part of the investigation, are Rome and other world powers using the Lucifer device on Mount Graham where we went, are they using that to observe something that the rest of us are unaware of?
Yeah.
And something that they believe maybe represents that ancient war, or maybe something worse than that, they're keeping eye on something that's approaching the Earth. And as you might remember, that was something Father Malachi Martin said Mount Graham was being used for. When Art Bell asked him some years ago why the Vatican was so invested in the study of deep space on Mount Graham in southeastern Arizona, Malachi Martin said it's because at the deepest levels of the Vatican power infrastructure, they know what's approaching the Earth and that it will be of the utmost importance in the future. So Malachi Martin said that a long time ago. Interestingly, we asked Guy Cosmonalgo what he thought about Malachi Martin and his comments, and he seemed to be actually perturbed by the man, and he gave us some very negative comments that we also are going to publish. Now, but one other thing, because people listening to your show, there might be some of them that are going to say, now wait a minute, the Jesuits didn't have one thing to do with the naming of the Lucifer device.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't point out is how they have access to using it, plus they're an integral part of the whole complex at Mount Graham International Observatory, and as such, they're connected to the very consortium, the German astronomers that did name Lucifer, and who are part of the odious Max Planck Institute, which is a group that gave assistance to the murderous experiments of the Nazis under Dr. Mengele in the 1940s. Also, in our interview with Guy Cosmonalgo, he told us that the VORG, the Vatican organization up there that studies deep space, he said that they have a Jesuit point man in the search for alien planets or observing alien planets, and that he uses the Lucifer device. In fact, here's a brief quote out of what he said to me, which he said to me in writing. Quote, as it happens, one of us, Father Paul Gabor, just finished his PhD thesis work at the Paris Observatory on designing an instrument for a proposed European Space Agency spacecraft mission to search for exoplanets, but his work was in optics, not biology. He just moved to Tucson, Arizona, and is developing collaborations with this is blurred right here, with those at the University of Arizona, end quote. So, based on Cosmonalgo's statement, the VORG, the Vatican's observatory, they have a well-placed insider in the Large Binocular Telescope project through their association with the University of Arizona, and through him, they are actively using the Lucifer instrument. So for me, it doesn't make any difference who named it. The fact is that they're all part of the same consortium, and they're all using it.
In your opinion, Tom, when you look at all this and the research that you've done and the things that are unfolding now, and we can divide it up if you want to, but do you have a sense that all of this is a deception at the highest level, that all of this is theatrics and it's even instigated to a certain degree by the Vatican? Maybe that's for political agendas or what have you. But what do you think?
What do you mean?
Well, if we look at the what is happening now with the prophecies of the Pope, that this might be the last one, with the potential advent of the Vatican announcing alien life, etc. Do you think that this is a deception at the root of it, or is this really what's going on, if you know what I mean?
Oh, no, there is a level of deception. There was two things, and they almost seem to be contradictory. One thing, we were amazed at how open the Jesuits were to talking with us, the material that they provided us for our book, the fact that I would almost use the term warmly embraced, excuse me, us at Mount Graham, spent the whole day, altogether probably 14 hours, all day, gave us access to everything, lots of stuff that you can't see in that little 3-minute movie trailer, in which we went into their observation rooms, we looked at their computer systems, anything we asked, they explained. And one thing that actually shocked us was how openly they talk about tracking UFOs in the heavens, almost like it's boring it happens so much. Like, honestly. Wow. And we didn't just get that from the Jesuits, we also got that from the Large Binocular Telescope, and the systems engineer who at the end, I have some pictures I could send you of us sitting in the control room there, which is massive because that's a monster of a telescope, talking about how people earn the right to be able to use the telescope. So let's say you're a professor, you're working at a large university, you write a paper, and the paper somehow, is going to wind up in some kind of peer-reviewed journal or something, and so you apply to have some time to be able to use the telescope, and that time is granted to you. Well, when you come there, you're on a specific mission, and you only have so much time to use it to try to study a part of space that you happen to be writing some university-level material about. And he was talking about how often they have to make themselves not get distracted by the fact that as they're studying some part of deep space, these UFOs appear.
Yeah.
And we have him on film telling us this while we're sitting there, and we're just astonished that it's just almost blasé to them to talk about how often these things appear. In any case, I kind of got off. You asked me about Rome using it. One thing we found out about you asked me about deception.
Yeah.
And while they were that open to talking about us, I can also tell you that once Guy Cosmologo in particular, once he knew who we were and what we were doing and what our investigation was about, he kept talking to us, but then his answers were very short, yes, no, and very evasive. And at some points, even argumentative. I mean, then he became very defensive of some of the material he had already provided us. Now, on the upside, before he became defensive, he sent us a copy of a private PDF. We're providing it free with the release of our book, and it's a gold mine of what he and the Vatican are considering regarding the ramifications of astrobiology, and specifically the discovery and announcement of the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence. And in this, he admits that these creatures he's talking about are those that society will likely look to soon to be the saviors of humankind.
Really?
So, yeah, that's right.
Wow.
And then to illustrate the theological soundness of that possibility, he astonished us even further in that he argued that humans, not only are they not the only intelligent beings in the universe, but he says these non-human life forms are described in the Bible. And then because when he says that, we said, well, where are they described in the Bible? He points to two things. One, he says the angels, but then he surprises us by something else. He points us directly to the Nephilim.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm going to quote you here what he sent me. Can I?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Tom.
Quote, other heavenly beings come up several times in the Psalms. For example, look at the beautiful passage in Psalms 89 that calls out, let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? The heavens are yours, the earth also is yours, the world and all that is in it, you have founded them. Now that's a quote from the Bible, and then he follows. Likewise, God asks Job, and this is from Job 38:7, if any man can claim to have been around at the creation when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. Now here's what he says. Are these heavens, holy ones, those in the sky, the morning stars, heavenly beings? Is there more to it than references to angels? Or do they refer to some other kind of life beyond our knowledge? These are not the only non-human intelligent creatures mentioned in the Bible. Now, Henrik, this is where for me, and you know my background with the work I've done on writing books on the Nephilim and the giants and genetics and all the rest of it, this is where this really got me. This knocked me over. He says, there is also that odd, mysterious passage at the beginning of Genesis chapter 6 that describes the sons of God taking human wives. With it is a frustratingly oblique reference to the Nephilim, the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. Most biblical scholars suggest that the Nephilim and the sons of God in Genesis can be explained away as a leftover reference to the creation stories of the pagans who surrounded ancient Israel, that they were written by the kind of people whose culture saw anyone not of my tribe as being unspeakably alien. Likewise, the reference to heavens and stars singing and praising the Lord can be seen simply for the beautiful poetry that it is. But whether you interpret these creatures as angels or aliens doesn't really matter for the sake of our argument here. The point is that the ancient writers of the Bible, like all ancient peoples, were perfectly happy with the possibility that other intelligent beings could exist. End quote. This just knocked me over, because you have to ask yourself, did the Vatican's top astronomer actually mean to use the story of the Nephilim from the Bible as an example in response to our question about the kind of space saviors? Because that's what they're talking about, who we would soon look to for salvation. Well, Henrik, that incredible assertion was only topped by what he then told us. Then, in quoting John 10:16, which says, and other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall be one fold and one shepherd, end quote. Cosmonalgo says, perhaps it's not so far-fetched to see the second person of the Trinity, the Word, who was present in the beginning, coming to lay down his life and take it up again, not only as the Son of Man, but also as a child of other races, end quote. And so I had to email him back and say, do Vatican scholars, based on what you just said, do they actually believe that Jesus might have been the star child of an alien race? Do you, Cosmonalgo, do other Jesuits, do they secretly hold that the virgin birth was in reality an alien abduction scenario in which Mary was impregnated by E.T., giving birth to a hybrid Jesus? And that he did not answer. He would not answer. But others, we took what they had already given us and some of the papers that have been written, some of which have been published, some of which haven't even yet been published, but these are written by Opus Dei level theologians that are working at the highest levels of academia, in Catholicism, who have given us what would seem like impossible theology if it wasn't for their position, their high-ranking positions. And these are people who study, by the way, the local Indians call Mount Graham the star base.
Interesting.
We're talking about Dr. Christopher Corbally, the vice director of the Vatican Observatory Research Group on Mount Graham until just 2012, till this last year, who believes that our image of God is going to have to change now, as ET life is confirmed by scientists, including the fact that we're going to have to evolve away from this concept of an anthropocentric God into a broader entity, an entity that does not just represent us intelligent, Star Trek God, a God that represents all the life on all the various planets.
Sure.
Father Funes goes equally far. The El Observatory Romano actually published a paper by him that the public could read, that was kind of a scratch on the surface of the kind of Catholic doctrine that we're talking about now. Anyway, I could go on, but just look for, I'm going to send you the PDF as soon as I get it.
Excellent. Well, it's very interesting. Yeah, go ahead. Finish the thought, Tom.
Well, just we're talking. This is bigger than Petrus Romanus. This book's probably going to be 700 pages, probably 1,000 authoritative references, all kinds of documents and pictures. And then, because there's too much to put in a book, when we release Exo Vaticana, we're putting together on 2 DVDs, literally dozens and dozens, tens of thousands of pages of documents and information that we're going to make free with the book itself. That's how broad this whole investigation has been.
Now, let me ask you this. It might be a difficult question, of course, to answer, but I want to get your just take on it. What do you think? Because there's two different scenarios as I see it here in a way, and one is that if there is a plan to announce ET openly and publicly, and again, whatever they are, if they're really ETs, if they're demons, if they are Nephilim, whatever they are, one scenario is that the Vatican are basically passive onlookers to this. They really have an idea, they have a hunch about what's going on. They're currently investigating it, but they're not, if you will, pulling any strings necessarily. They're passive onlookers, or they are actually already in communication with these ET already, and actually very, very carefully are planning how to do this, when to do it, if even you mentioned astrotheology before, even when the stars are aligned, in the right place to do all of this. Do you think that they're passive, don't really know what's going on, but they're curious, or are they really more involved than that? What do you think, Tom?
Well, based on the research that we've done, I think it's both, in the sense that some of them are in the know and some of them are not. But it's the ones who are in the know that are saying things that are shocking. And you have to go back really basically just the last decade, where things suddenly seem to start changing. The Vatican's ramping up its production of science and theology studies. You can see this. November 2009, they convene a 5-day study week on astrobiology at the summer residence of the Pope, on the grounds of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, where some of this theology is coming from, during which astronomers, scientists from countries around the world joined these prominent churchmen specifically on this question, to evaluate the origin of life, the evolution of life on Earth, and also the prospects of life and the occurrence of life on other planets. Now, whether any discussion was held at that time concerning the Lucifer device and what it might be monitoring in deep space from atop Mount Graham, whether that was happening is unknown, because those meetings were private. But what was interesting, and it might have been a coincidence, was just 3 months later, 90 days later, January 2012, the Royal Society, the National Academy of Sciences for the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, they hosted representatives from NASA, the European Space Agency, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, and all these people came together, and they did to discuss what was officially labeled the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for science and industry. And Lord Martin Rees, who was the president of the Royal Society at that time and the Royal Astronomer, talked about aliens staring us in the face in a form that humans can't recognize without proper equipment. Other speakers there talked about overwhelming evidence. Others talked about unprecedented proof. Others talked about the danger of exposing ourselves to these intelligences. But they did all of this, and even their own press releases repeat the language I'm using. That they were doing this because they were saying we're close to making irrefutable disclosure of alien life. Well, that had the Vatican spokespeople in the news again, and this time they were being even more candid regarding the future of the church and Jesuit preparations to accommodate a dynamic ET reality. Well, don't forget that in the lead-up to the Vatican-sponsored conference 90 days earlier, the El Observatorio Romano, which is the official media voice for the Vatican, interviewed Father Gabriel Funes, and he's also an astronomer. He's the director of the Vatican Observatory now, and he made it clear that accepting the reality of intelligent aliens not only does not contradict the Catholic faith, but that in fact to believe otherwise is the real heresy, as it puts limits on God's creative freedom. And I'm going to tell you, that has everything in the world to do with a forthcoming papal proclamation about life on other planets, and people will know that they heard it here first, right?
Yep.
There's an attorney by the name of Daniel Sheehan. He worked for 10 years as the general counsel to the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. Have you ever interviewed him?
Never have, no.
He would be a person to talk to now, because he said that Funes' explicit statement that disbelief in extraterrestrial intelligence, that it puts limits on God's creative freedom, was code talk for those who are in the know, for those who know something's coming. Mm-hmm. In other words, he was speaking, what do they call this, El Sato or whatever it is, beneath the voice. Yeah. He was speaking in a way that those who get it do and the others who aren't supposed to get it wouldn't. And what Sheehan said was, on the face of it, the statement might not have seemed like much of an important statement, but what was unbeknownst to the non-Catholic world was that Father Funes' specific choice of words tracks precisely the exact wording of the key aspects of the official Catholic Church edict that was issued in 1277 by Bishop Timpier, the Bishop of Paris, in which the Catholic Church had officially condemned St. Thomas Aquinas' theological proposition, what's known as Proposition number 34, in which Aquinas had publicly asserted that the first cause, meaning God, cannot possibly have created other worlds. Well, Proposition 34 was the official condemnation by the Catholic Church against that statement on the specific grounds that it seemed to put limits on God's creative freedom. The precise words that were deliberately used by Father Funes in 2008 in the lead-up to their conference on astrobiology, which was then followed by the other conference. In fact, let me read something to you here. Can I?
Yeah, sure. Sure, go ahead, Tom.
Because here's what he goes on to explain why the reassertion of this theological position by Roman Catholic leaders is very important. Here's what he says. The fact that these precise words were chosen by the official Jesuit director of the Vatican Observatory to announce the new official policy of the Roman Catholic Church, acknowledging the likelihood of the existence of extraterrestrial life elsewhere in the universe, is understood by those of us who are familiar with such matters to be no mere coincidence. It may indeed prove to be of extraordinary importance. For this specific 1277 Catholic edict that condemned Proposition 34 of Thomas Aquinas is deemed by church authorities and by secular historians alike to have been the action which opened the plurality of worlds debate in Western civilization, which led directly to the removal of Earth from the center of the universe 400 years ago. Now listen to what he says. And these words may point the way here in the 21st century to our removal from our position on the pinnacle of the pyramid of life, end quote.
Interesting.
And Sheehan, by the way, he's also important. He ran he was the counsel for the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. for a long time, and he's a famous lawyer. He worked on the Silkwood case, the Iran-Contra affair. I mean, he's got some super high-profile cases on which he was an attorney, so he's no Johnny-come-lately, and he's also a friend of the Jesuits. In fact, he is the priest who, when Jimmy Carter was the president, and Carter wanted to get the secret Vatican files on UFOs, he's the priest that they commissioned who worked through the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. to try to get those files from the Vatican, and they were flatly denied. They were told they would not see one part of those secret files.
Wow.
And this was the Jesuits making the request from the Vatican for the President of the United States, and they were turned down.
Wow. Jeez. Now, when a new pope will come onto the scene, and we know now that this is going to happen shortly here, and again, most likely Petrus Romanus, which is remarkable, but we will keep an eye on this. We'll keep watching this, of course. But do you think, Tom, that there will be a revival, if you will, of the Vatican, where this new Pope will take a more active, role in I don't know, leading the world again. With the ET question is a major part of this, of course, as you've been outlining here so far. But do you suspect we can at least at the beginning, initial steps, see a more, I don't know, more powerful Vatican, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could happen in a lot of ways. One, if they could somehow get past. If you could have a pope that would come in that would make explicit statements condemning pedophilism, opening an investigation that could be more open than just the internal investigators for the Vatican, and prosecuting, I think they could do some things that could help heal their image in the world. So I think that kind of stuff could happen. But there's something that could be much bigger than that. Some of the theologians for the church that we talk to, they believe that there is a new space faith, and that's what we started calling it, cosmolatry. That's what we started calling it, that ultimately is going to give birth to a new form of Christianity. It'll still be Christianity in their mind, but Christianity, the Copernican-based Christianity that saw the cosmos as the earth at the center of the world, all of that,
yeah.
That's all coming to an end. Christ must be born again, one of them told us. He's got to be reincarnated into a world that's become too different from the ancient one in which he lived. And this all casts very significant light will cast on the new official position of the Vatican, that not believing in aliens and being willing to accept their superior morality and coming new religion is not only paramount to heresy, but it's based on a dying, antiquated belief system. And so imagine you got to, obviously now you got to put your far out cap on, right? But imagine that tomorrow morning we wake up in its official disclosure, and the Pope is standing in the well of the United Nations with all these other global leaders, and he is saying to the religious world, the Christian world, and you'd have leaders from the Muslim faith and the Hindu faith and like that, whoever their top recognized individuals are, saying, this is not a problem, our faith can accommodate this, and in fact, this has always been the bigger picture of our faith, not the fundamentalist, narrow view of Christianity. Well, that church, the Vatican, would suddenly become the focal point, the focus of the entire world, and based purely on their acceptance of these ET benefactors, they could play a role that no other denomination. Who's going to do it? Like the Baptist denomination, somebody's going to say they don't have the global voice that the Vatican does.
Yeah.
And this could be something that overnight could bring the Vatican back to being the global voice piece for relationship with the eternal God.
And do you see this then? And this is also why I'm suspicious of this, because I think that the Vatican has always held a lot of power, but they've done so covertly. It's just a kind of an illusion, if you will, that they're not really active in current world affairs. I believe they are, but this might be their opportunity and their time, if you will, then to actually, as you say, more openly be engaged and active in this. And this will they will have effectively a front row seat here in global affairs in a completely new way, and they will take that opportunity to do so. Absolutely.
I mean, the Vatican holds sway to over 1 billion followers, but more than that, they influence a great number of people, government, and policies worldwide. In fact, not only could this raise them to a new global profile, I keep going back to, you're going to have to read the documents we were given that say, in fact, acquiescence to extraterrestrial gods is going to be widely and positively received by the masses of the world as a result of the Vatican's astronomers, their professors of fundamental theology, and the new Pope himself accommodating a new ET reality. Here's what Father Giuseppe Tanzelli Nitti, if you look at any of our websites, there's a quote from him on the top of the website where he's talking about how Christianity as we know it today will not need to be immediately renounced, but that once the information that is of a religious nature that comes to us from outside, from beyond the earth, from outside the universe, once it's confirmed, then it's going to mandate a rereading of the gospel. And here's why he says that's going to happen. I'm going to quote this to you. Extraterrestrial life contexts re-propose the intervention of mediators from faraway worlds. Now he's talking about intervention because the world today is on the wrong path, right?
Yeah.
It's falling apart. Governments are falling apart. Everything's falling apart. The world's coming to its knees. People have an apocalyptic mindset today.
Yeah.
So he's talking about mediators from faraway worlds, and I'm back to the quote now. The delivery of moral messages that awaken in human beings the existential questions that ordinary terrestrial life has made dormant. Moreover, contact with civilizations different from our own is a powerful conceptual place in which the human family returns to wisdom and self-understanding. I'm still quoting. As Paul Davies has intelligently pointed out, the powerful theme of alien beings acting as a conduit to the ultimate, whether it appears in fiction or as a seriously intended cosmological theory, touches a deep chord in the human psyche. The attraction seems to be that by contacting superior beings in the sky, humans will be given access to privileged knowledge, and that the resulting broadening of our horizons will, in some sense, bring us a step closer to God, end quote. So this is one of the very well thought out, new Catholic theological papers that I'm reading here, in which Professor Nitti is elaborating on this alien-derived privileged knowledge that is coming our way, and that's going to save us all from ourselves. In fact, in this, I'm not kidding. In this doctrinal paper for the Vatican, he goes on. He expresses theologically how, upon contact with these highly advanced aliens, the Church will have to. Here's a quote. Quote, will have to conclude that our understanding of revelation until that moment had been largely imprecise and even ambiguous, end quote. So, over and over, and from more than 24 scholars of the Vatican, of the Catholic Church, their top leaders, their top thinkers, the guys who write their doctrine, to a man who is willing to talk to us, are telling us this is coming. But to answer your question, I think that this very well thought out answer to extraterrestrial intelligence, in which they are warmly embracing. There's not one of these guys that's raising a red flag. Not one of them saying this could be deception. Every single one of them saying that, in essence, they know the way better than we do. In fact, they go into the Omega Point, New Genesis, stuff that we won't have time to talk about right now, but in which they're really talking about all of us joining more of kind of almost a super global organism. It becomes very, very strange. Benedict himself was a devout mystical holder of this belief system, as we document in this church, in this book. And some of this is, well, what can I say? But all is not lost. A new improved religious revelation based on information acquired from another world is coming, they say. It's even going to involve a strange alien god. And according to prophecy, it's going to be advocated for by a priesthood seated in Rome. And both ancient and modern authorities said that. The considerable downside, in my opinion, is, first of all, to reject the mysterious new gospel and to neglect bowing down before the image that they're talking about, as they're saying that to neglect this is the real heresy. Well, if you study Roman Catholicism, if you study their history, there were times when you didn't want to be depicted as a heretic.
Sure, yeah. And
yet biblical prophecy foresees the re-advent of the Inquisition, a time where you will bow down or you're put to death.
Yeah. Wow.
There won't be any place for heretics like Father Funes referred to, that reject the papal decree and refuse to accept the alien dogma. It's not going to go unpunished.
And the ruleship of these, whatever they are, right? Wow, interesting. This is really it's really like childhood's end, actually. If you think about it, it's remarkable. I wanted to ask you this as well, Tom, and I know we're coming up towards the end here in a little bit, but if this is the dawning of, let's say, assume it's the age of the Antichrist, it's as the prophecy of the popes kind of play out, if you will. Rome will be destroyed to a certain degree, and the the aliens will be brought in, if you will, announced as our saviors, and things will kind of be built up. If that is the case, what do you think timeline-wise we're looking at here? Are we talking a few years ahead? I mean, we talked about 2012 last time you were on the program, and this is more or less accurate because we've had a delay in it. The inception was taking place there in March 2012, as you said, but then we didn't get to know about it until about a year later, a little bit less. But we could be looking at something similar here, where there's a kind of it's going to play out in from 2012 and onwards. But it might be a little bit of a delay, if you will, on it. But do you think we could be looking at something like this in the next couple of years here, or what do you think, Tom?
Well, several things. One, if you read the book Petrus Romanus, while we pointed to March and April of last year, which turns out covertly to have been exactly when he did resign, more broadly we said we thought this would happen between 2012 and 2013, partly based on the prophecies in the Zohar and other things, understanding that when it comes to the ancient prophets, they didn't use the Gregorian calendar. So,
sure.
So for that very practical reason, we didn't try to nail down 2012, meaning from January to December. Secondly, I've never liked setting dates. What I do is I try to point to what everybody is saying and then raise some big questions around it and say, if they're right, if they're correct, here are particular things this could set in motion. So I could say that if Catholic and Protestant prophets down through time who have pointed to the years 20, and not just 2012, they pointed to the year 2012 as the time in which something would begin.
Right, yeah.
They actually write about its zenith occurring in 2016. And in fact, I'm going to reread, the book Apollyon Rising 2012, that's been my best-selling book ever. I'm going to re-release that book here in the next few months as an enlarged version of that book, and it's going to have a part of the title. It's going to say Apex 2012 or Apex 2016 or Zenith 2016, to reaffirm that what most of these prophets were talking about was something starting in 2012 that reaches its zenith in 2016. Now, why evangelicals take hold of that is because that's 3.5 years later. So was there something that started in 2012 that actually started the beginning of the Great Tribulation period? And now with the prophecy of the popes, does the false prophet appear? You got Obama now headed for Israel, the same time during which this conclave is going to be happening in Vatican City. You got Obama traveling to Israel preaching peace, peace. The Vatican just signed a new agreement with Israel that we also predicted in the book Petrus Romanus. So here's what I would say. I would say that what we do is we analyze stuff, and that includes the esoteric and the political, and then we try to kind of point at what it might be becoming. But we're not prophets, and we don't set dates. I don't think it's wise to do that, and it's been proven.
Yep.
Harold Camping, I think last year before, showed us again why it's probably not a good idea to set dates for certain things to happen. So that's really the only way I can answer your question. All I can say is we were right in Petrus Romanus about the dates that we speculated about. We were right in ways that basically raised the hair on the back of my neck. Part of this, though, is not to our credit. It's simply us studying what other greater minds, like René Thibault, the Jesuit priest 61 years ago, who wrote The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes in French. And then he died, and the book fell into obscurity. Nobody even knew it even existed until we found it and translated it into English. And his work is astonishing. And by the way, not only did he predict when the final Pope's timing would come as 2012 or to 2013, he uncovered anagrams that are in the prophecy of the popes that the world doesn't talk about. We unflesh a lot of this in the book Petrus Romanus. He shows For instance, anagrams as seen in the Latin text, for instance, Peregrinus Apostolicus. That's the prophecy for the 96th Pope on the list of the prophecy of the popes, Pius the Sixth. That anagram not only reveals the papal name, it does it twice. If you take Peregrinus Apostolicus, it literally, P-I-U-S, and then in Apostolicus, P-I-U-S, it appears twice so that you have the name Pius transparently embedded hundreds of years ahead of time in the original Latin text that predicted what the name of that pope was going to be 200 years before Pope Pius VI was elected. Then he decrypts a couplet called Apostolic Pilgrim that signified that both Pius VI and the next Pope, Pius VII, would be forced into foreign exile as pilgrims, which in fact they were. But why is that important? Because more fascinatingly, he suggests that repetition serves as a poetic refrain for the last Pope. In other words, Pius is similar to the binary Mayday, Mayday that sailors cry out.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have time to talk about that, but that takes you to the electrifying visions of another pope named Pius X, and he served as the pope in the 1900s that saw his papal successor, called by his same name, carrying the name Pius, fleeing Rome over the bodies of dead priests at the outset of the end times, at the time when the final pope, Petrus Romanus, would appear. So what I'm saying is, all I've done, and Putnam has done, is spend a year at a time in intense investigative research with a half dozen people poring over ancient documents to try to find if there is, in fact, something legitimately hidden in these ancient esoteric texts that are pointing to a specific period of time in which they believed that the end time would come, the false prophet would appear, the Antichrist would arise, and the end times, as known in the Bible, would unfold. And one of the things that we found, some people have criticized me because I'm an evangelical, and they said, why are you quoting Catholic prophecies?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't just Catholics. Turn of the century evangelical Protestants, more than 24 of them we found, who pointed to something starting in the year 2012 that will end in the year 2016. They said this is when the false prophet would appear, the Antichrist would appear, and several of them said at the same time the city of Rome would be destroyed. And their language is almost identical to the prophecy of the popes. This is from the 1700s to the 1800s, and it includes famous preachers like Jonathan Edwards, who wrote in their own papers how that this would happen between the year 2012 and 2016. So, what did all these people see? That's really what interests me. I don't want to set dates, but what I am talking about what was there behind them, in other words? What was behind the inspiration of pagans, Mayans, and Baptists? Right?
Yep.
And Catholics. And isn't it astonishing that 61 years ago Thibault said he would retire in March or April, and he did.
Yeah. Wow.
And in our book we said, look for this to happen between 2012 and 2013 based on the Zohar, and it has. So all I can say, folks, is so far we're batting some very, very high averages here, and if it indeed does point to the arrival, if the final pontiff, if Petrus Romanus is the false prophet, then we know what days we're living in, and what I would say is you better make sure that you do what you can to prepare now for what could be coming.
Blueprint or prophecy? That is the question. It's a fascinating story, this one, Tom, and we have to stay in contact and see how this unfolds. Of course, have you back at some point at a later date when the saga continues to unfold. But before we wrap up, I just want to say again here that the book, of course, you guys out there should check out right now if you want to find out more, is The Final Pope is Here, Petrus Romanus, Again, fascinating story. And the new upcoming book, as Thomas mentioned, Exo Vaticana, and will be out shortly. The website where you can follow Tom more closely is RaidersNewsUpdate.com. And if there's anything else, Tom, you want to leave us with, the other websites or additional closing words, please go ahead and do so.
Just to say, Henrik, thank you very much for having me on your program. I know that you accommodated an awful lot of people like me who come in with strange worldviews, and we appreciate it very much.